The planet Valeria was a desolate place, a nightmare landscape of rugged mountains and deep valleys. The shadows of monstrous creatures roaming the surface created a constant atmosphere of danger and despair. Sarah, an alien girl with bluish skin and eyes that shone like stars, was alone there. Abandoned by her own kind, she had learned to survive on her own, exploring the ruins that told stories of long-forgotten civilizations. Sarah moved cautiously among the ruins of an ancient city. Her senses were always alert, listening to every sound, feeling every vibration in the ground, attentive to any signs of the beasts that hunted at night and slept during the day. Her survival skills had been honed over the years, but each day was a constant battle for life. She felt loneliness as a constant weight but did not allow herself to succumb to despair. In her darkest moments, she thought about the reason for her abandonment, an unanswered question that haunted her lonely nights. She took shelter in a half-destroyed ancient building, where she found some remnants of technology that still worked. Her agile fingers quickly worked to salvage useful parts, a small consolation in her lonely world. As she worked, her mind wandered over the reasons for her abandonment. Why had her species left her there? The questions were a constant torment, but she knew she had to focus on surviving first. Outside, the dust storm began to intensify. Sarah peered through the broken window, watching the sand clouds being blown by the fierce wind. She knew the planet's creatures used these storms as cover for hunting, so she needed to stay hidden and silent. As she watched the chaos outside, she felt a wave of sadness. It was hard not to feel small and insignificant in such a hostile place. But there was a strength within her, a determination that refused to be extinguished. Sarah took a small object from her bag, a locket she had found in the ruins. Inside was an image of her home planet, a constant reminder of what she had lost. She held the locket tightly, closing her eyes and breathing deeply. She needed to stay strong. Survival was not just a matter of skill, but also of hope. And despite everything, she still had hope. Night fell quickly on Valeria, and the elongated shadows of the ruins cast sinister shapes on the ground. The distant howl of a creature echoed through the mountains, making the hair on the back of Sarah's neck stand on end. She knew she had to find a safe place to spend the night. Moving quickly, she found a small hideout in a crevice between two crumbling walls. There, she huddled, looking at the locket one last time before putting it back in her bag. With the onset of darkness, the ruins became a labyrinth of invisible dangers. Sarah closed her eyes and focused on her other senses, listening carefully to every sound around her. She knew the creatures were cunning and relentless, and any careless move could be her end. Still, her determination remained unwavering. She was a survivor, and each new day was a victory against the odds. As the dust storm roared outside, Sarah allowed herself a brief moment of rest. Her thoughts wandered to her past, to the days before she was abandoned on Valeria. She remembered her home, the stars that shone in the night sky, and the familiar voices of her family. The longing tightened her heart, but she refused to cry. Tears would not help her survive. Only her strength and resilience could do that. Suddenly, a distinct sound broke the monotony of the storm. Something was moving among the ruins, something big. Sarah held her breath, her eyes wide in the darkness. The creature was approaching, and she knew she had to stay completely still. Every second felt like an eternity as she waited, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of heavy footsteps passed slowly, each movement echoing like thunder in the night's silence. Sarah remained motionless, her body tense like a stretched rope. Finally, the steps moved away, and she released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The immediate threat had passed, but the night was far from over. She knew that every moment of carelessness could be her last, and with that in mind, she stayed vigilant, awaiting the dawn. As the night slowly progressed, Sarah thought about her goals. Finding a way to leave Valeria was her primary focus, but she also wanted to discover the truth about her abandonment. There was more to that story, something she needed to know. With renewed determination, she promised herself she wouldn't give up. She would find the answers, no matter the cost. And so, amid the darkness and constant danger, Sarah remained steadfast. The dawn would bring new challenges, but she was ready to face them. Valeria was a place of despair, but also of resilience. And as long as there was a glimmer of hope, Sarah would keep fighting, her eyes shining like stars in the vastness of the cosmos. In the space above planet Valeria, the Human Alliance reconnaissance ship orbited silently. John, an experienced explorer, observed the data flashing on his screen. He had heard rumors about the desolate planet and the stories of monstrous creatures inhabiting its surface. His mission was simple: collect information and return. But something about the planet intrigued him, a feeling that there was more than met the eye. Determined to investigate more closely, John piloted his ship into Valeria's atmosphere. The landing was difficult, with the dust storm making visibility challenging. He finally landed on a high plateau, a short distance from the ruins where Sarah was hiding. Equipped with his exploration suit and basic armament, John began to move through the inhospitable landscape. His steps echoed on the rocks as he made his way toward the ruins. Each step was careful, avoiding unwanted attention from the local creatures. He knew he was in dangerous territory, but curiosity and a sense of duty drove him on. As he approached the ruins, he heard a distinct sound, a piercing scream of despair. John ran toward the sound, finding Sarah being attacked by a huge lizard-like creature with thick scales and sharp teeth. She fought with all her might, but the creature was relentless. Panic was evident in Sarah's eyes, but there was also a fierce determination that impressed John. John acted quickly, firing his weapon and drawing the creature's attention. The shots echoed through the ruins, and the creature turned to him with a threatening roar. John kept firing, forcing the creature to retreat. He advanced, placing himself between Sarah and the beast. After an intense struggle, the creature finally retreated into the darkness, leaving John and Sarah breathless but alive. Sarah, still catching her breath, looked at John with a mix of fear and gratitude. He knelt beside her, observing her superficial wounds. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice firm but gentle. She nodded, still in shock from the encounter. "Yes, thank you. I thought I was lost." John smiled, relieved she was okay. "Let's get out of here. These ruins aren't safe." He helped Sarah to her feet, and together they began to move away from the ruins. John couldn't help but notice Sarah's distinctive appearance, her bluish skin and glowing eyes. "You're not from this planet, are you?" he asked, curiosity evident in his voice. Sarah shook her head. "No, I was left here. My species abandoned me." John frowned. "Abandoned? But why?" Sarah sighed, the pain of her memory clearly reflected in her eyes. "I'm not sure. They said I was different, a threat. And they left me here to die." As they walked, John felt a wave of empathy for Sarah. He knew the pain of losing loved ones and felt a growing connection with her. "You're not alone now," he said with determination. "We'll find a way out of here together." Sarah looked at him, surprised and grateful. It was the first time in a long time that someone cared about her fate. As they moved away from the ruins, the dust storm began to subside, revealing a starry sky above. To Sarah, those stars represented hope, a hope she thought she had lost forever. As Sarah and John moved away from the ruins, the atmosphere became calmer. They found shelter in a nearby cave, protected from the storms and creatures. As John lit a small fire, he prepared something to eat, sharing the meal with Sarah. "So, Sarah," John began, looking at her from across the fire, "tell me more about yourself. How did you end up here?" Sarah hesitated for a moment but finally began to speak. "I was part of an advanced civilization. Our planet was overcrowded, and there was growing tension between factions. One day, they decided that some of us were too different. Threatening, they said." John watched the flames as he listened, feeling the pain in her voice. "Different how?" Sarah sighed, her eyes shining in the firelight. "Some of us were born with special abilities. I could sense others' emotions, sometimes even read their thoughts. At first, they thought it was a blessing. But then they began to see me as a threat. They thought I could use my powers to manipulate them. John nodded, understanding the distrust and fear that could arise in such a society. And then, they abandoned you here? Yes, she replied, with a note of bitterness. An expedition was sent to explore new worlds, and I was brought along. When we arrived on Valeria, they simply left me. They said it was for my own safety and theirs. John felt a tightness in his chest. He knew well the pain of losing those he loved. I'm sorry, Sarah. It's not fair. Sarah looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. And you, John? What brought you here? John sighed, looking at the stars through the cave entrance. I lost my family in an accident a few years ago. My wife and son. After that, nothing else made sense. I joined the Human Alliance as an explorer, trying to find a purpose. Maybe, in a way, I was looking for redemption or a way to escape the pain. They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their thoughts. Sharing their stories created a silent connection, a mutual understanding of the wounds they carried. In the days that followed, Sarah and John began to work together to survive. They explored the surroundings, looking for resources and investigating more ruins. Each danger faced together strengthened their trust in each other. One morning, while walking through a narrow canyon, a creature emerged from the shadows, roaring with fury. John quickly drew his weapon, but before he could shoot, Sarah raised her hand, her expression focused. The creature hesitated, seeming confused, and slowly backed away. John looked at Sarah, impressed. Did you do that? Sarah nodded, still a little surprised by her own ability. I felt its fear. I managed to calm it down. I think I'm starting to understand my powers better. John smiled. That's incredible, Sarah. You can really make a difference with those abilities. Later, as they gathered around the fire, the conversation flowed more naturally. John asked Sarah about the things she missed most from her previous life. I miss the stars, she said, looking at the sky. On my planet, they were different but still beautiful. They made me feel connected to the universe. John nodded. Me too. The stars always gave me hope, even in the worst moments. They're constant, always there to guide us. Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth grow in her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt she had someone she could trust. John, thank you for being here. I don't know what I would do without you. John reached out and held her hand for a moment. You don't have to face this alone anymore, Sarah. We're in this together. Their relationship blossomed from that point. Together, they faced more challenges, each testing their skills and resilience. During an incursion into another ruin, they found a still functional data terminal. John worked to access the information while Sarah kept watch. I got it. John exclaimed, a triumphant smile on his face. It looks like there are records of a secret facility on this planet. There might be answers about why you were left here. Sarah felt a mix of excitement and fear. What if we find out it was all a mistake? Or worse, that it was intentional? John looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. Whatever the truth is, we'll face it together. I promise. During the exploration of the secret facility, they encountered more dangers but also valuable clues. Sarah began to feel a change within herself, an acceptance of her past and a new hope for the future. John, in turn, found in Sarah a new purpose, something to fight for and protect. On a quiet night, as they rested by a small fire, John looked at Sarah with a thoughtful expression. You know, Sarah, since I met you, I feel like I've finally found a direction. Not just survival, but a true purpose. Sarah smiled, feeling warmed by his words. You saved me, John. Not just from that monster, but from myself. I was lost, but now I feel like I have a chance to truly live. As the flames danced between them, the connection they had formed grew stronger. Sarah and John were no longer just survivors, they were companions, united by adversity and a shared hope for a new beginning. And so, with each challenge overcome, they grew closer than ever, ready to face whatever the future held for them, together. In the days that followed, Sarah and John continued their search, guided by the clues found in the secret facility. They finally arrived at a vast underground structure hidden beneath a mountain. The entrance was camouflaged, but thanks to the coordinates from the data terminal, they found it. Upon entering, the environment was completely different from the rest of the planet. Clean, well-lit corridors stretched ahead, filled with advanced technology. "This place is amazing," John said, his eyes scanning the walls full of equipment. Sarah felt a shiver down her spine. "It feels familiar, yet terrifying," she murmured. Memories of her childhood and training began to surface, bringing a wave of conflicting emotions. As they explored, they found a central laboratory. On the screens, data about various individuals of her species was displayed. Sarah saw her own name and a series of detailed information. "Here it is," she said, pointing to the screen. "It's about me." John approached, reading the data. "It looks like you weren't just abandoned, Sarah. There's something more going on here." He accessed more files, revealing a detailed colonization plan. They were using you and others as experiments to prepare this planet for colonization. Sarah was in shock. "So they left me here as a test, to see if I would survive?" The words barely left her mouth as the emotions of betrayal and anger welled up inside her. "That's not all," John continued. "There are records of other failed attempts, others abandoned who didn't survive. You were the only one who made it." He turned to Sarah, his eyes full of compassion. "This is horrible, Sarah. They used you." Sarah felt a wave of nausea. How could they do this? To their own children? The memories of her childhood, the distrust and fear, became more intense. She was torn between the need for justice and the desire to leave it all behind. "We need to decide what to do with this information," John said, his voice calm but firm. "We can use it to stop them from continuing these experiments, or we can leave and never look back." Sarah struggled internally with the decision. "If we expose this, they'll come after us. And if we do nothing, more people will suffer." As Sarah and John discussed their options, the surrounding environment seemed more threatening. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors, indicating the arrival of more people. "Someone's coming," John said, his expression becoming serious. "We need to hide." They hid behind a series of containers as a human exploration team entered the facility. To John's surprise, one of the members was an old acquaintance, Mark, a former mission companion he hadn't seen in years. "Mark," John whispered to Sarah. "He was a friend, but something doesn't seem right." The team began examining the data on the terminals, seeming very interested in the information about the experiments. "This is exactly what we were looking for," Mark said to his team. "With this, the Alliance will have a tremendous advantage." John felt a wave of distrust. He and Sarah moved silently to a better position to listen. "We need to take this data back immediately," Mark continued. "We can't let anyone find out about this." Sarah looked at John, her eyes full of concern. "They're not here to help us. They're here to exploit these experiments." John nodded. "We need to get out of here, but we can't let them take this data." As the team began downloading the files, Sarah and John acted. "Mark," John called, stepping out of hiding. "What are you doing here?" Mark turned, surprised. "John? What are you doing here?" His eyes narrowed. "Wait, you're not supposed to be here." "I could say the same about you," John replied, his voice tense. "Why are you interested in this data?" Mark smiled coldly. "You really don't get it, do you? This data is the key to the Alliance's survival. With this technology, we can improve our chances of colonization and expansion. Even if it means sacrificing innocent lives?" John challenged, his tone full of disdain. "Sometimes, sacrifices are necessary for the greater good," Mark said, his expression hardening. "You should understand that, John." Sarah stepped forward. "These aren't just statistics, Mark. Their lives, like mine. You have no right to use this for your own purposes. Mark looked at Sarah with curiosity. You must be one of the experiments. Interesting. This complicates things. He turned to his team. Get them. A fight ensued. John and Sarah used all their skills to face Mark's team. With her agility and empathic power, Sarah managed to disorient the attackers, while John used his combat experience to disarm them. Amid the chaos, Mark appeared, his eyes full of hatred fixed on John. You've always been a problem, John. Now, I'll solve this once and for all. They fought fiercely, hand to hand. Despite his skill and experience, John was at a disadvantage against Mark's brute strength. Sarah saw John being knocked down and, without thinking, ran to help. Using a combination of her agility and powers, she managed to temporarily immobilize Mark. John got up, panting but determined. It's over, Mark. We're not letting you continue this. Mark laughed, even restrained. Do you really think you can win? The Alliance will hunt you to the ends of the earth. Sarah looked at John, a new determination in her eyes. Then we'll have to be ready to fight. Together. With one last effort, they managed to subdue Mark and his team. The immediate threat was neutralized, but both knew the danger was far from over. They needed to leave the planet before more reinforcements arrived. As John and Sarah destroyed the data on the terminals, Mark watched them, powerless. This isn't over, John, Mark said, with a threatening look. They'll come after you. And she, he pointed at Sarah, will never be safe. John looked at Sarah, his expression determined. We'll take care of it together. We'll leave this planet and find a place where we can make a difference. As they left the facility, Sarah felt stronger than ever. She knew the path ahead would be difficult, but with John by her side, she felt she could face any challenge. They were no longer running away, they were fighting for something bigger than themselves. And so, with the truth revealed and a new purpose in their hearts, Sarah and John departed, ready to face whatever adversity the future held for them. As Sarah and John moved away from the destroyed facility, the weather on the planet began to change. Violent storms erupted, as if the planet itself were reacting to the destruction of the data. They knew they needed to find shelter quickly. The sky darkened, and the roar of the wind drowned out any conversation. Suddenly, a transmission came through John's communicator. It was Mark's voice, filled with anger and determination. You may have destroyed the data, John, but you can't escape. My orders are clear, neutralize any threat to the mission. And you and that girl is a threat. John exchanged a worried look with Sarah. We need to prepare for another battle, he said. He won't give up easily. They headed to a more protected area, a set of caves that could serve as a final stronghold. As they prepared their defenses, the tension mounted. Sarah felt her heart race, but also a newfound strength. She was no longer a victim. She was ready to fight for her future. The battle began with the arrival of Mark's men, armed and determined. John and Sarah fought side by side, using every trick they had learned throughout their hard lives. Sarah used her empathic abilities to confuse and disorient the enemies, while John covered her with precise shots. In the midst of the chaos, Mark appeared, his eyes fixed on John with hatred. You've always been a problem, John. Now, I'm going to solve this once and for all. They fought fiercely, hand to hand. Despite his skill and experience, John was at a disadvantage against Mark's brute strength. Sarah saw John being knocked down and, without thinking, ran to help. Using a combination of her agility and powers, she managed to temporarily immobilize Mark. John got up, panting but determined. It's over, Mark. We're not letting you continue this. Mark laughed, even restrained. Do you really think you can win? The Alliance will hunt you to the ends of the earth. Sarah looked at John, a new determination in her eyes. Then we'll have to be ready to fight. Together. With one last effort, they managed to subdue Mark and his team. The immediate threat was neutralized, but both knew the danger was far from over. They needed to leave the planet before more reinforcements arrived. The storm outside reached its peak, making the escape even more risky. John and Sarah ran against the wind, each step a struggle against the forces of nature and time. The cave where they had taken refuge now looked like a battlefield, with debris and wreckage scattered everywhere. As they ran, Sarah felt adrenaline coursing through her veins. Every lightning bolt illuminating the sky reminded her of the imminent danger. "John, we need a plan," she shouted over the wind. "We can't just keep running." John nodded, looking around frantically. "We need to find a safe place to take off. The ship is a short distance from here, but with this storm, it's going to be difficult." They took shelter behind a large rock to plan. John checked the holographic map on his device. "The ship is half a kilometer from here, but with Mark and his team behind us, we need a distraction." Sarah thought quickly. "I can use my abilities to create an illusion, something to distract them long enough for us to reach the ship." John looked at her with admiration. "It's worth a try. But it's going to be dangerous. Are you sure you can do it?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the inner strength growing within her. "I can do it. Let's go." With a plan in place, Sarah focused, creating an illusory image of herself and John running in the opposite direction. The illusion was so real that even John had to remind himself it wasn't true. As Mark's team moved to intercept the illusion, Sarah and John took advantage of the distraction to move quickly toward the ship. The storm continued to roar around them, but they were determined. Each step brought them closer to their chance of escape. Upon reaching the ship, John worked quickly to initiate the takeoff sequence while Sarah kept the illusion active. Come on, John muttered as the ship's engines began to come to life. The ship shook under the force of the winds, but finally lifted off. Sarah's illusion collapsed as the ship rose, and Mark's team realized the escape. "Don't let them escape," shouted Mark, but it was too late. The ship took off, traversing the turbulent atmosphere and finally reaching open space. Inside the ship, Sarah and John breathed a sigh of relief but knew the fight was far from over. "We did it," Sarah said, exhausted but determined. But Mark was right. "They're going to keep coming after us." John looked at her, his expression determined. "Then, we need to stay one step ahead. We'll find a safe place to refuel and then decide our next steps." As the ship moved away from planet Valeria, Sarah felt a mix of relief and apprehension. She knew the future would be difficult, but with John by her side, she was ready to face any challenge. Together, they had defeated Mark and his team, but the true battle for freedom and justice was just beginning. And so, with the storm behind them and a new purpose ahead, Sarah and John continued their journey, determined to fight against any adversity the future held for them. With the battle over, Sarah and John moved quickly to find a way off the planet. They knew time was against them. They found an old hangar hidden in the mountains, with a ship that still seemed operational. John worked feverishly to get the ship running while Sarah kept watch. Her thoughts were filled with doubts and fears, but also with a new hope. "We can do this, Sarah," John said, not lifting his eyes from his work. "We'll get out of here and find a new purpose." Sarah nodded, trying to push away the dark thoughts. "I trust you, John. But what will we do next?" John stopped for a moment, looking at her. "We'll keep fighting. Not just for us, but for all those who can't fight. We'll use our skills and knowledge to prevent more injustices like this from happening." The ship was finally ready. They boarded and started the takeoff sequence. The hangar shook as the ship powered up, and with a roar, they took off. The planet's storms made the ship sway, but John kept control, guiding them to open space. As they moved away from Valeria, Sarah looked out the window, seeing the planet that had been her nightmare and now a place of revelation. She felt a mix of relief and sadness, but also a sense of freedom she had never experienced. "Where do we go now?" she asked, turning to John. "First, we need to find a safe place to refuel and plan our next steps," he replied. "After that, The universe is the limit. They flew in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts. John thought of his lost family, feeling he was finally finding a new path. Sarah thought of her species, the horrors they had committed, and the victims like her. But most of all, she thought of the future she could now help shape. "John," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "Thank you for everything. You saved me in ways I never imagined possible." John smiled at her. "You saved me too, Sarah. We saved each other." They continued their journey, leaving behind the desolate planet and the horrors it housed. With each kilometer they put between them and Valeria, they felt lighter, freer. They knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, but they were ready to face them together. Finding a refueling outpost, the ship landed smoothly. John and Sarah disembarked, welcomed by a more hospitable environment and a community of travelers and traders from various species. It was a place where they could hide and plan their next steps. While John refueled the ship and searched for supplies, Sarah explored the outpost, feeling strangely at peace. She found a small square where merchants sold artifacts from different worlds. One object, in particular, caught her attention, a small, glowing sphere that emitted a soft and comforting light. "What is this?" Sarah asked the vendor. "It's a memory sphere," the vendor explained. "It stores memories and can replay them. A way to keep the memories of places and loved ones alive." Sarah bought the sphere, thinking of how she could use it to preserve her own memories and the stories of her species. Returning to the ship, she found John with a satisfied smile on his face. "We're ready to leave," he said. Sarah showed the sphere to John, explaining its function. "I want to use it to keep the memories of what we've been through and the people we've lost alive." John nodded, touched by the idea. "It's a good way to remember where we came from and what we're fighting for." With the ship refueled and their hearts lighter, Sarah and John left the outpost, ready to face the next chapter of their journey. They knew the fight against injustice and exploitation would be difficult, but they were determined to make a difference. As space stretched infinitely before them, Sarah and John felt full of hope and determination. Redemption and trust were possible, and together, they could make a difference in the universe. And so, with a new purpose and a bright future ahead, they continued their journey, ready to explore the unknown and create a new beginning for both.